Free software download, free tournaments, fun, simple, secure.
If there's a lot of money involved, there's going to be sharks and hustlers and cheaters wanting to get a slice of that pie.
The history of this poker site is rather dark, and in 2007, they experienced a scandal that shook the poker world. In this video, we unravel the complete story behind the most diabolical poker scam of all time. Our story begins when 6 fraternity brothers began playing online poker while attending the University of Montana. They soon realized that operating an online poker site would be a lot more lucrative than being one of the players. So, they decided to launch their own website. Scott Tom got funding from his father Phil Tom and worked with his fraternity brothers to find a software development company and eventually worked with a South Korean company to design their poker site, which was to be known as Absolute Poker. Absolute Poker officially launched in 2003. After receiving a license from the Kanwake Gaming Commission, Scott Tom and his friends moved to Costa Rica to manage the company. When Absolute Poker's software was in development, many test accounts were created to make sure the program is working correctly. One of these test accounts, known as number 363, could see the whole cards at any table. This test account could not be used to play in real money games. It was only used for development purposes to see that the pots are distributed correctly. This was one of the first accounts ever opened in Absolute Poker, making it very likely that the person in control of this account has somewhat intimate ties with the company. 4 people in different parts of the United States open up accounts at Absolute Poker. These 4 accounts do not know each other. The accounts are Grey Cat, Steamroller, Double Drag, and Pot Ripper. They play in Absolute Poker for a bit, but they don't do well and their accounts are not logged in for many months. These are actual and real players. Remember these names because they play a key role in how the cheating took place, which will be revealed later. In September of 2006, Congress passed the UIGEA. Private companies like PokerStars and Full Tilt Poker chose to continue accepting US players. Absolute Poker was still a private company at that point because it had not gone public yet. So, it continued operating. Ultimate Bet was in a precarious position. It was a public company and the price of its stocks were dropping dramatically. However, the majority of its customers were from the US, so they did not have the option of pleasing shareholders by focusing on non-US customers. Greg Pearson, the owner of Ultimate Bet, had provided anti-fraud software to Scott Tom when Absolute Poker had been launched. Absolute Poker quickly agreed to take over operations from Ultimate Bet site through a complicated merger that involved the Kanwake Gaming Commission. It also provided Absolute Poker with massive revenue potential as the operator was one of the largest poker sites in the country. In 2007, a major software update was in process. The company hires programmers from many areas, including Costa Rica. The villain of our story comes across account number 363 with whole card access, and seeing the massive potential of cheating players with access to their whole cards, he hatches a plan. In August of 2007, a player by the name of Pot Ripper won the weekly $1,000 tournament at Absolute Poker, and he did that with amazing fashion. He ran through the tournament, folding at the precise time he needed and winning every showdown. Some opponents became suspicious of how this player was playing. He just seemed to know what the opponent's whole cards were. The suspicious players provided examples of these hands, which were so outrageous that virtually all serious poker players were convinced that cheating had occurred. Forum members uncovered the unusually high win rates of 3 other players, namely Grey Cat, Steamroller, and Double Drag. These players played 150-300 limit hold'em. They were beating the best high-stakes regulars on the site at an incredible rate. On September 13th, 2007, Pot Ripper was in an intense heads-up battle with another player whose username was Crazy Marco, aka Marco Johnson. In the final hand, Pot Ripper went all in after the turn card and won the hand with a 10 high. Crazy Marco, who had a 9 high with a flush draw, was shocked that Pot Ripper could go all in with a 10 high. It was not a strong enough hand for that kind of action, especially given the $1,000 buy-in for the particular tournament. Crazy Marco contacted Absolute Poker Twitter to ask for a hand history and complain that a suspected pot tripper had cheated. Absolute Poker claimed that there were no indications of cheating from pot tripper, but they sent Crazy Marco a file with the hand histories anyway. When he looked at the file, Crazy Marco had no idea what he was looking at. It was a jumbled mess of code that he could not decipher. At the time, Crazy Marco did not know that the file that Absolute Poker had sent him did not contain the usual hand history, but instead sent a file that contained all sorts of private information that the poker site would never release. Before I continue with this video, let me introduce you to Universal Poker. If you're playing online poker without a good poker affiliate, you're missing out on extra value. Universal Poker are one of the world's largest poker affiliates, working with the most reputable sites in the industry to provide players exclusive promotions and dedicated support. These promotions include extra rakeback, enhanced deposit bonuses, free rolls, and more. Visit universalpoker.com today and start maximizing your value on your favorite poker sites. The file contained every player's hole cards, observations of the table, and even the IP addresses of every player playing. This information was later placed into a hand replayer and uploaded into a YouTube video. Anyone with the slightest poker aptitude could see that Pot Tripper had knowledge of all the hole cards. Poker players went to work analyzing the data, not the hand histories themselves, but other, more subtle information contained in the file. What these players noticed was that, starting with the third hand of the tournament, there was an observer who watched every subsequent hand played by the cheater. Interestingly, the cheater folded the first two hands before this observer showed up, then did not fold a single hand before the flop for the next 20 minutes, and then folded his hand pre-flop when another player has a pair of kings as hole cards. This sort of cheating went on throughout the tournament. The players turned their attention to this observer. 2plus2 forum reports that Pot Tripper's email address is scott@riveraltd.com. They traced the observer's IP address and account name to the same set of servers that host Absolute Poker, and also, apparently, to a particular individual named Scott Tom, who was part owner of Absolute Poker. About 2 hours after the result of this investigation is revealed on the internet, the DNS information of riveraltd.com is deleted. Absolute Poker claims Scott Tom has not been employed by the company for over a year. After the connection to Scott Tom became evident, Absolute Poker finally addressed the cheating concern. They issued a statement that the incident had been a case of a disgruntled employee who hacked the system to show that it could be done. According to the statement, the employee was attempting to frame Scott Tom, but Absolute Poker maintained that Scott was not involved. They claimed that the cheating had only occurred for approximately 40 days, and they issued $1.6 million in refunds to players that had been affected. But that may have only been 10% of what Scott Tom and other cheaters got away with during their years of seeing opponents' hole cards at the table. On January 16, 2008, the Kanwake Gaming Commission conducted an investigation and fined the company $500,000. Neither investigation named the employee that was responsible for the cheating. So how was this scam pulled off, you might be asking? Unbeknownst to players, Absolute Poker had already cut a secret deal with the cheater. The company agreed not to release his name in return for a full and detailed explanation of how he cheated, according to company officials and other interviews. The cheater found inactive accounts at Absolute Poker and changed the password to these accounts at server level. He opens up test account number 363 at a separate computer, which allows him to see all the hole cards at the table. He then gets his family and friends to cash out his winnings. The way he does this is after he gets a big amount of cash at the poker tables, he plays against his relatives and buddies and loses all the cash to them. This was how the money was cheated and moved to avoid detection for so long. September 2007 comes, and as the money piles up, so does their ego and greed. Other poker players make comments in chat that they suspect that there is cheating and collusion involved. The cheater logs in as Double Drag and then loses every hand intentionally in order to cover up his trail. But alas, it was too late, and the scam by that time was uncovered. In April of 2011, the US Department of Justice indicted Absolute Poker and Ultimate Bet. Scott Tom and his brother Brent Beckley Beckley were personally indicted for their work involving Absolute Poker. Scott Tom fled to Antigua to avoid indictment. Brent Beckley received 14 months in prison in 2012. The federal government seized no more than 10% of the total amount that it should have had on deposit. Absolute Poker players had about $53 million in combined balances. The seizure should have left Absolute Poker with at least $48 million. However, during the time of seizure, it only had $3 million. Part of the reason so much money was missing is that Absolute Poker and Ultimate Bet used player deposits to repay fraud victims. It never forced Tom Scott to repay the stolen funds. The site was unable to continue doing business. In October of 2011, it finally turned out the lights. In 2017, Scott Tom turned himself in. He was released on a $500,000 bond. The Pot Ripper account was eventually traced to the site's corporate offices in Costa Rica and was thought to have belonged to Absolute Poker's Director of Operations, AJ Green, as well as reportedly Scott Tom's best friend. The US DOJ used settlement money from Black Friday to refund players who lost their funds when Absolute Poker and Ultimate Bet were seized.